Hello and welcome back to Planning Aces, where FP&A meets what's next. Today's conversation threads three vantage points into one urgent storyline: how AI is reshaping planning, operations, and value creation. You'll hear how CFO Andrew Casey of Amplitude is deploying AI agents to democratize analytics and compress decision cycles. Why CFO Eric Brown of Cohesity believes this moment differs from past tech waves, marked by massive capital intensity and a coming epic data battle. And how CFO Chris Miorin of Apexanalytix is turning data structure and on-prem investments into faster product velocity and a bigger development runway. I'm Jack Sweeney, your co-host, and as always, I'm joined by performance management guru Brett Knowles, our resident thought leader. Together, we'll surface practical takeaways on workflow automation, finance use cases from reconciliations to order ops, and the leadership mindset required to avoid AI washing while steering real competitive advantage. Three finance leaders, one accelerating theme. AI is only as powerful as the data it touches, and FP&A is where the power becomes plan, action, and results. Brett Knowles joins us after this message from our sponsor. Hello, everyone. Hey, Brett. I'm excited to line up these three planning aces because their views really neatly span today's FP&A reality. One is reshaping internal capacity. Another is empowering customer workflows. And a third compares this moment to the early internet and early cloud. I think our hope is that listeners hear not just experiments today, but how finance leaders are actually steering strategy that could endure for years. That's where this gets interesting. Three angles, one theme, and a lot to learn.
Right. Well, so obviously the common theme for these three that we're going to listen to today is about AI. How does AI, artificial intelligence, fit into your organization and de facto FP&A? And my reflection on my preamble about the level of turbulence in the economy right now and the uncertainty, AI must be the most powerful tool we have to be adaptive, to not only have little spidey senses out there to determine when uncertainty is happening in your environment, but helping you come forward with additional ideas on how to solve it. And so AI has different roles. One role is about sensing any changes in your business environment or internally. And the second is as an additional team member as you brainstorm about what you might do to plan around those events. And I think as we listen to these three gentlemen, we will begin to get some characterization of what that might look like.
Let's start with Andrew Casey. Andrew built his finance career at Sun, Oracle, HP, and ServiceNow, and then stepped into CFO roles at WalkMe and now Amplitude. He's guiding a transformation, a customer-centric growth initiative there. Here's Andrew Casey.
I would tell you Amplitude is built on, strong machine learning, AI infrastructure. That's the underpinnings of a kind of our secret sauce on the data, the behavioral information. But we introduced about 2 months ago that we're gonna include agents, AI agents within the platform, and that's going to be included in everything that we do. And really, where I think that customers will get the greatest value associated with AI is through optimization of workflow. So many customers for us today, they develop charts and queries, and they get insights back from those interactions that happen. But what they really want is a method for automating some of those tasks. So I don't want a data science requirement to actually go create a chart with an Amplitude that gives me the data set. I want the agent to help the business user create those charts, those queries, those processes, and make recommendations that they can take action on. And at some point, when customers get comfortable enough, allowing an autonomous interaction. So if they're seeing, call it heat map issues where customers were clicking on the wrong spaces, making corrections on the fly based upon a set of parameters. And so what we're doing right now, the first steps are better enabling customer workflows so that they can then go drive greater and greater optimizations. Experimentation is a great example of that. Before, you might have, I want to see if my blue banner has a better reaction than the red banner, and that's an experiment. That's an A/B test that someone may do on their website. Well, now you can do thousands of them on a continuous basis using an agent, and then the agent can summarize that information and give you a host of different areas. And it may be that's still human interaction where they're making decisions on what changes are to be made based on the feedback, or there might be a section where you're driving greater and greater personalization where the agent's actually making those changes to drive the greatest service delivery for you in particular. So those are the areas we're really focused on. It's driving efficiency, more effectiveness, improvements in a more rapid way. And the great thing is we're taking the approach that we want every customer to have access to it. So we're relatively small as a finance function at Amplitude, but there are areas where we're using AI to make ourselves more efficient and scale. What AI is really good at is summarizing lots of data, being able to actually give you a quick synopsis of it. You may see it in emails if you've got Gemini deployed in Google, or you've got other methods that you're using to summarize emails. But what we use it for is summarizing, big regulatory disclosures, or helping us write new accounting memos, or checking on the status of matching between POs and accruals. And there's just a host of areas where we're trying to drive greater and greater efficiencies given the volume of data, where AI can help summarize it quickly and drive towards a recommendation, which for the most part is within parameters we're very comfortable with. We're going to be deploying a number of different AI solutions in the order operations process. So making sure that increasingly validation checks on, matching that if a customer requires a PO as part of the order, that it's there before we hit the close button on the order. So it's a lot of those things on how we can drive greater and greater efficiencies in the workflow that we have. And we're taking the same approach with our customers.
Brett, Andrew sketches AI agents helping everyday users. How significant is that shift? He's really pointing to the democratization of, there it is, analytics.
Absolutely. I think there's two key things that Andrew chipped in, that being one, and I'll loop back to that because the precursor to that is all about step one of introducing AI is the automation of workflows and sort of identifying where those opportunities look at. And, we see so many examples of this in the real world. Simple examples are things where purchase orders are being cut without a matching internal order associated with it. And so right now, that's a manual task where someone is supposed to reconcile receipts against purchase orders against the underlying contract. And it's incredibly manual, and it's the weak link in the chain. Often we see someone's purchased something that's not actually covered by the standing order, or a delivery is made that's not covered by a purchase order. And so automating that obviously saves all the time and trouble, but more importantly, gives you a way higher accuracy rate of that review. So when we take a look at people doing those sort of manual reviews and reconciliations, they have a hit ratio of between 70 and 80%. In other words, you discover 70 and 80% of the problems that need to get solved. But the other 20% still represents millions of dollars of unreconciled transactions, which could be bad or good, who knows, but they're not reconciled. So every organization can think of examples like that where we've got manual tasks. Another simple example is just onboarding a customer. Onboarding the customer takes input from the external salesperson, the internal salesperson, the customer, probably internal finance that, sets up the credit rating, maybe someone in the IT department to set up the, AP account and so on. And each one of those has a stacked lead time. In other words, maybe the total work that gets done is an hour, but because it's going through multiple departments in their out basket and the in basket gets processed eventually, the standard lapse time is 2 weeks. So it's taking us 2 weeks to get 1 hour of value add time. AI can now compress that down to, an hour or two. Again, yes, there's a labor saving, but more importantly, there's a much higher accuracy, and you get that opportunity cost. I now have 2 weeks additional revenue from that new customer.
He also went further than our other planning aces on AI inside finance. I mean, where do you see the nearest wins for finance leaders? Are reconciliations and close activities the first beachhead, or would you start elsewhere? Excuse me.
Certainly in the reconciliation part that I talked about, and the reconciliation is in taking a look at the difference between transactions that occurred versus those that are bound by existing contracts and regulations and so forth. So that's one whole audit stream that's available. The second is just monitoring spending and accounts to see if there's any spending going sideways. We did have one client, for example, where the procurement process was quite laborious, but the maintenance people could cut a purchase order and a check immediately because you don't want the plant to go down. Everyone learned that, so now they no longer went to procurement to buy their materials. They went to maintenance because they could get the stuff done and they have to go through the vendor audit process and so on. And so suddenly you see this spike in purchase orders coming through maintenance and a significant decrease in purchase orders going through procurement. So again, once you know something like that's happening, it's easy to put a check in place or an audit in place to discover it. But stuff like that's happening day to day that you don't know about. So all those financial transactions, which we don't know about, but have a financial impact, and you can't even predict them. And if you did predict them, you put so many controls in place, you could never move forward. So there's a bunch of gains like that. Then I would say the third category I'll go into is just idea generation. Like part of our job in FP&A is to help people come up with ideas and be creative about how we run the business. And AI just brings another creative brain to the table. So literally you're adding that AI agent or capability as another team member. Some other ideas are good, some aren't good, but at least it's giving you creative input that's beyond the stretch of your current employee base. So I think those are the three major categories where we're seeing finance teams internally gaining from AI.
Yeah, those three. Excellent. Next up, it's Eric Brown, CFO and COO at Cohesity. Across 3 decades, Eric has led startups, turnarounds, IPOs, and a variety of global tech firms, shaping strategy through growth, crisis, and various transformations. I teed this up by asking him, as a veteran of multiple tech waves, his first CFO post was roughly 30 years ago, so keep that in mind. I asked him to give us some perspective on where we are now. And here's what Eric said.
Yeah, this is a little bit different. I mean, we, compare this, kind of like to the .com era, the web, let's call that, 2000 plus or minus. This and cloud, cloud's been, everyone's been talking about cloud now for a number. There's no doubt that, cloud is another huge revolution, but it's been growing at, high, but kind of moderated, rates. It's been a multi-year journey. Because I reflect back upon the early days of the cloud, everyone's thinking, oh my gosh, every single workload is going to move to the cloud like overnight. Okay. So here we sit, 10 years later, and that is not the case. We've seen the rise of the hyperscalers who are demonstrating great growth rates at massive scale, but there's still, on-premise applications, everywhere. And now we're seeing there's very subtle different variations or vintages of cloud. There's like classic public cloud, then there's private cloud, then there's self-managed, and then there's, sovereign cloud, and there's the extreme version of like sovereign cloud with sovereign citizens operating the sovereign cloud. And so, it's not kind of the winner take all monolith that was anticipated 10 years ago. AI is, I think we're on the cusp of something fundamentally different. What I find interesting is that the capital intensity here is unbelievably high. Like, you look at the cost to spin up and train these large language models, and it's like, there's going to be maybe 8 to 10 long-term LLMs worldwide. It's going to be a pretty small number, just given the capital intensity to gather the data and spin up the GPUs to vectorize and index everything. And so this is very, very different than what we saw in cloud. Yeah, in cloud, 10 years later, we see like the large hyperscalers, but then, we have like cloud-based SaaS applications everywhere. Yeah, they're already on top of that infrastructure, or some of it's private and bespoke, but it's still fragmented. The nature of what constitutes a successful LLM, the training required, means this is going to collapse into like 10 gargantuan entities. And there'll be some open source and things like that. But this is kind of the concentration of capital requirements here is very, very different. Also, the broad-based applicability is extraordinary, right? My very, very first startup at DataSage, we had a neural network. It was an AI company. And, we struggled mightily to build a couple of vertical applications over a couple of years. You can now spin up agentic AI applications in weeks.
So, Brett, he covered a lot of ground there, but gave some great perspective on these different technology waves. Or maybe not. What did you think?
I thought it was a breath of fresh air because, like him, I'm an old dog. I've lived through those things as well as a CFO. And I just loved his comparison to .com. What happened, my story of .com was that there's a lot of hype and no substance. Like, in 1999, heavy investment. And then by 2000, we suddenly realized that, holy smokes, Batman, there really is nothing there. Whereas with AI, there's a huge amount there that it really is making a substantial difference to business in almost every aspect. And so I thought that was a great comparison, that you can't take a look at what happened in the .com era and then map it again. Then you moved on to the cloud. Again, great points about the cloud in terms of how everyone assumed there's going to be this mass migration, but in fact, there's a slow migration. And in fact, there are various flavors of cloud out there, and some have moved forward, some have not. And so, again, that's an accurate portrayal of what happened with cloud. That's not what's happening with AI. It's not happening with AI because the benefits are so huge. You just like dabble your toe in it for a bit and you're going to leap in that pool lickety-split quick. So there is none of this sort of dabbling thing. And his point is accurate that the capital expenditure required to create an AI engine is so ginormous that there's going to be no shakeout because there's only going to be 3 or 4 players from the get-go. And they're accelerating so quickly that it's almost impossible for anyone to close the gap at this point. And so, again, it's different than what we experienced with the cloud because of the fact we can't create your own AI. You have to build it off one of the engines, that the benefits are so huge, as opposed to cloud where it took you years to get to those benefits. It's like a light switch with AI. So again, it's super important when we're in leadership meetings and people are saying, yeah, I lived through this in the .com era, or I lived through this with cloud, that you recognize this is different to 3 genres.
So tell us something more. What are your thoughts around this notion that there'll only be 2 or 3 big players among the LLMs?
There's no question that's going to be the case. It's going to be the case because the cost to build one of these instruments is ginormous, as is evidenced even now by the players being, Microsoft and Google, and everyone else is kind of living off those models. So there may be a couple of surprises, but it's pretty doubtful for a couple of reasons. One is the capital expenditure is ginormous. The infrastructure requirements are also ginormous. The server farms that are required and the electricity requirements are so huge, it's another barrier to entry. And the third is they're making progress so fast that it's pretty hard to catch the train at this point if you don't have something already in play, because we're almost moving on to 3rd generation AI, where AI is building AI. And so it's going at exponential rates. So for all those reasons, and maybe the fourth one is there isn't a lot of benefit in it anyways. we're doing these LLMs based on global knowledge. Well, global knowledge is remaining the same. Whether you build an LLM looking at global knowledge or I build one, we're still looking at the same global knowledge. So it's not like I'm bringing a differentiated set of data to the table. In, the example that he had earlier on about the cloud, every time a new cloud structure forms, there are other benefits to that particular cloud structure, whether it's on-prem, consignment, whatever it might be. Those give you a different opportunity. There is no incremental differentiated opportunity in this AI space. So I never thought a company could take a run at Microsoft as Google did. So I refuse to say no one else is going to enter the AI market because we've seen miracles happen before, but it's getting pretty tough to imagine what that would look like.
This is where I get to say, but there's more. Here's what Eric had something else to share with us.
Yeah, I had this interesting conversation with my head of, applications not that long ago. And we're always looking for a way to take cost out of our internal IT spend run rate. And we were looking at one vendor that we use. I'm not going to name them, but they're a mega capped cloud tech company. And he said, you know what, with Agentic AI, with half a dozen people in a month, we could completely replicate that application. Which for me would be like, wow, I can take, $1 million a year spend out of my run rate. I'll spend maybe $200,000 to build it, and maybe at most $75K a year in maintenance mode thereafter to avoid, $1 million of recurring cost. I mean, that's like an order of magnitude reduction here.
Wow.
And so that's just like one small example. And the other thing that we're seeing is very different than, kind of the cloud or the web, revolution is like the strategic importance of data. And so data has become a critical, asset. And so, the company that controls the privileged data is the one that will be able to enable agentic AI more rapidly to drive their top line, optimize their bottom line, and ultimately produce disproportionate returns versus the competition. And so, there's a data battle here that is going to be epic and enduring. And again, I didn't really see that, in the cloud. Not all the data moved overnight, never will, and it wasn't as applicable in kind of the 2000s, kind of the web revolution. So, kind of the conditions are different. The capital requirements are massively high. It leads to concentration, and the broad-based applicability of the tech is just absolutely mind-boggling. And we're barely, I think, seeing what can be done here. I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years is like every single company says, yeah, they have to report to the board. Yeah, we have an AI story. It's like a check the box thing. And, have they fully deployed agentic AI? No, they haven't. I mean, companies are still struggling to aggregate their data, their permission data, which is necessary to build agentic AI, right? So, people are going to spend much more time focusing on that than they ever have before because the value of that data is like 100 times what it used to be. And that ironically is the space that we're in today at Cohesity. Like we are a data protection vendor. We back up all the data. So by definition, we have in our file system all the valuable data in one place already curated, right? And so we're now working to AI enable that data on behalf of our end users. And we're seeing a lot of interest there. And it's, it's strategic interest as opposed to like IT infrastructure type procurement cycles and interest. So, again, we're kind of like a second order beneficiary, as it were, of the AI revolution. The LLMs, the capital intensity, that represents the absolute leading edge here.
And by the way, did you know Eric Brown also served as CFO of MicroStrategy many years back during a real crisis chapter for the company? It was a notable tour of duty, and our audience can discover it on episode 1120 of CFO Thought Leader. What did you make of that last piece of what Eric shared, Brett?
Well, so he, moved on from AI and how it reflects on history to a conversation about how they're using it. And so he's putting on his COO hat. Now, you might disregard that because we're not CEOs, we're FP&A. But as FP&A, we got to know what the heck's going on in the COO's brain in order to keep up with them. And so what his brain was telling us, and I think he's looked into this more than many of the other people that you and I have talked to, in that whole, he talks about the broad-based application of AI. He talks about how development time has been, reduced to a fraction, and that, Agentic gets us to the market in weeks. Those are all interesting points. Where it impacts us, he rolls that forward and goes, so I'm pulling out like $1 million a year in development time that I don't need. Like that's an order of magnitude reduction. Well, as FP&A, we better be making sure that all of our departments are pulling out $1 million a year from their development by using this. In other words, it's our job to get the cattle prod out and get this stuff in use to drop costs, cycle time down, and quality up.
All right, let's move on to our final planning ace. This is Chris Miorin, CFO of Apexanalytix. That's analytics spelled with an X. Chris brings a career shaped by Army leadership, corporate development, and investor relations. To this FP&A conversation, he had something to contribute. Here is some of what he shared.
We've put meaningful capital behind our AI infrastructure. And we do that for a number of reasons. One, because we have our IT infrastructure on-prem, we need to have redundancy to be able to continue to deliver our solutions. And one, we are building additional products for our customers, like I described. That's not the only one I described, which is kind of that agentic risk remediation solution, but helping our customers natively speak on our app through a chatbot, part of the process. So there's revenue attached to those investments, but there's also efficiency to be gained. We estimate that we can really increase our development capacity by like 40% using some of this agentic AI platforms. And so investment both on a hardware and a software platform allows us to just come to market with our product roadmap much quicker. That's across your CRM, your ERP, your other tools. Like, we need to make sure that we can quickly and confidently access our own data. And then where an AI solution could be helpful, make sure that we've structured that data in a way that we can then leverage that technology. So it's not, hey, we need to be doing AI. No, it's, we have our data structured correctly and we're harnessing the already existing software tools in a way that then allows us to springboard forward by using an AI solution. So that's the approach that we're taking and actively leading within Apexanalytix.
Now, coming back from Chris, you were just underscoring data expertise, and he really emphasizes data structure here, I thought. Why does that remain such a stumbling block for finance teams? I mean, we hear it so often, but I thought he framed it in a clear, practical way, and it's important.
Oh, he had, I'm going to say 4 points. I mean, what's nice about Chris in this episode is he ties a nice ribbon around everything that we've heard. So, he talks about, how we're going to use AI and what part of that needs to be on-prem versus, off-prem, which is a whole privacy issue we've talked about. It's all the data security stuff we talked about. Then he moved on to talk about how using AI for building products, which is, again, what we heard with the other two players, and also talked about, as a third point, faster product development. And again, a key point, especially in these turbulent times, the faster you can take advantage of a market gap, the better off you're going to be. And then your point, fourth point, was about structuring data. So if there's going to be this epic data battle, you better make sure that your data is nice and squeaky clean, like it's usable, it's structured correctly, and so on. And we see in many, many cases when we're helping organizations move forward with AI that their data is a mess. And, you know that when you try to implement an ERP system like SAP, you see some of it. But this is looking at the global data platform, not just what I need in the ERP side. And we see so many disconnects or just messy behaviors. A simple example is often when a company acquires another company or they merge together, we end up with maybe the same customer, but two different customer numbers. One when I dealt with Acme through company one, and the second one when I dealt with the same Acme company through the acquired company. Now I've got two customer numbers for Acme. We never bothered to reconcile them, or two purchasing systems, or two bills of materials. And now you've got dirty data. I didn't have to deal with that before. We now need to begin dealing with it, not only to get better valuation for our businesses, but also to take advantage of AI.
And Miorin, I would say, aligns closely with Casey on the themes they chose to talk about: AI as a driver of workforce efficiency, productivity, and usable access.
Absolutely. And if you remember, we started beating this drum about AI literally 2 years ago. And the quality of conversations we're getting from the CFOs now is obviously order of magnitude better, more thought out, more strategic, reaching deeper in the organization. And it's no longer, a mandate, everyone's got to play with AI. It's now, deep into what it does for product development, what it does for sorting out financial transactions and financial processes. What does it do for business valuation? What's the implication on things like data integrity? I mean, these conversations are substantially better than we've been having historically. And now they're almost a dime a dozen. Like, you talk to 3 CFOs and they all had an aligned story about this, and none of them are back at first base on this. They're at second or third base. And I think the scare for anyone that is still tinkering with it is these are the people that are going to grab your customers. These are the people that are going to grab your share. And you got to figure out how to get on this train quickly, because every passing day they're getting incrementally, maybe exponentially further down the track. And it's going to be harder and harder for you to close that gap.
So there's definitely a growing comfort with AI's strategic dimension. CFOs actually now see themselves as champions for AI. And, their responsibilities seem to be in clear view for many of them. How do we thrive in this new AI reality? It may require different behaviors, louder participation, CFOs making themselves known more in different types of meetings, and a better translation of the financial implications so teams across the country really understand the value.
Let me see if I can introduce a new term into society. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we're worried about ESG and environmental, societal, and governmental. And many companies were accused of greenwashing. Greenwashing is where I'm not really being good for the environment, but I'm making it look like I am in order to greenwash the company. Your listeners need to be careful that they're not AI washing, that they're not putting a glossy, lipstick on a pig by adding a layer of AI on the dinosaur product or the dinosaur process and saying to the world, we're now AI enabled. People are going to see through that in an instant. More importantly, you're not going to gain the competitive advantage by truly integrating AI. So the word of caution to your listeners is don't do AI washing. Don't just put a thin veneer on this, and don't be bamboozled by your team members who are making it look like they're doing AI merely because you're pushing them in that direction. Make sure that this is a substantial application of AI and giving you the competitive advantage that you're entitled to.
Great comparison. I'm also hearing CFOs are investing more time in how they explain AI opportunities. They're going about choosing their language carefully here. And you have to study this to understand if you're going to communicate something. So they're really grappling with the strategic impact and how to articulate it. They feel obligated to talk at, let's say, a different altitude than past technologies. I mean, you could greenwash cloud discussions back then, adoption with incremental and easy to narrate.
You're doing awesome. I would add on to that, though, that the trick is before you can explain it, you're sure as heck better understand it. Like CFOs and FP&A people better understand AI and understand in huge detail the possibilities inside the organization, because to a large extent, I don't think of it as a policing, because that's like catching things that have gone off track, but leading. We need to be leading the organization and pushing in those directions. And that should look like cutting people's budget back by $1 million, because you should be able to drain that $1 million out by better application of AI. We've got to be leading this charge.
Right. And those conversations are delicate. On talent and change, finance has to surface these issues thoughtfully and engage with care as teams adapt to new AI-enabled ways of working.
There you go. I think you got yourself a really good episode there.
There we go. Once more, thank you to Brett Knowles for joining us and helping us bring forth the takeaways from our distinguished group of Planning Aces. For all of us at Planning Aces, thank you for watching and listening. Till next time.